Philip Corso had been an Army intelligence officer on General MacArthur's staff in Korea, a member of President Eisenhower's National Security Council, and head of foreign technology and Army research when he retired in 1963. But in 1947 he was ordered to Roswell to find out what happened by his superior officer at the Pentagon. He says that 5 bodies were recovered from the Roswell wreckage that he saw, which were about 4.5 feet in length, had grayish brown skin, 4-fingered hands, and oversized, hairless heads. He also says that the technology recovered from the crash allowed the United States government to jump ahead in terms of fiber optics, night vision, materials used for stealth and body armor purposes, as well as many highly classified projects. Despite all the credible witnesses who've come forward over the years to speak out about what really happened at Roswell, the Air Force has never been quite ready to throw in the towel on the subject and admit anything. In fact, every few years they come up with a new explanation for what really happened back then. Recently, in 1997, the Air Force sought to explain the Roswell crash again, this time by saying that the exotic materials found there were related to a secret high-altitude balloon experiment known as Project Mogul. The problem was that Mogul was never active in that area until a few years later. The Air Force then added insult to injury by saying that the bodies found were actually dummies from high-altitude tests, but the dummies were not used until well into the 1950s. When asked about these discrepancies, the government responded that the collective memory of the Roswell event was off track as far as time was concerned. But to believe that, one would have to ignore all the news articles, radio recordings, and other evidences from 1947 that associate the UFO crash with that date. I guess the government policy is, when you don't agree with the facts, change them, ignore them, or rewrite them. The paper trail for UFOs in the government is long and complicated. This document, dated 1950, is a briefing for J. Edgar Hoover, the director of the FBI. It's said to have been produced in response to his request for information about crashed UFOs. It states that an Air Force investigator says that 3 flying saucers had been recovered in New Mexico. Each one was occupied by 3 bodies of small creatures, not more than 3 feet tall, dressed in metallic cloth clothes that the author of the letter compared to high-altitude flight suits. This briefing document leaves little doubt that the government has indeed recovered UFOs in its possession. One of the places mentioned in some of the original reports about the Roswell crash is Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio, a huge facility and home to the fabulous Air Force Museum. This base undoubtedly has seen many secrets come and go over the years. Long rumored to be the home of Hangar 18, a place where UFOs have been stored or examined, Wright-Patterson became the center point for official UFO inquiries when Project Blue Book was located there. Blue Book was the government's official inquiry into the UFO phenomenon and lasted from 1947 until 1969. But when the project was completed, files were found dating back as far as 1940. Only a half-hearted effort, the entire project had a budget of under $100,000 and worked through most of its tenure with a staff of under 10. Blue Book replaced 2 previous investigations, Projects Sign and Grudge. Mishandling of files and lackluster investigation procedures were just a few of the legitimate criticisms leveled at Blue Book. A scientific panel that examined the files concluded that 95% of all UFO sightings were explainable, 5% were not, and that UFOs were no immediate threat to national security. Despite official window dressings like Blue Book, Deeper questions remained about what the government really knew or didn't about UFOs. When a U.S. Senator named Barry Goldwater from Arizona attempted to gain entrance to a special room at Wright-Patterson said to contain the real information collected and maintained by the Air Force about UFOs, he was denied permission to do so. This is fascinating considering that Goldwater was also a reserve Air Force general. The person who denied him entry was also a good friend of Goldwater's named General LeMay. He told Goldwater, "Damn it, Barry, you can't go in there and I can't go in there. Don't ever ask me again." This event occurred in the 1960s. In March of 1975, Goldwater wrote a letter to a friend stating that it really happened. The letter has since been released to the public. Jackie Gleason will always be remembered as one of America's greatest comedy talents. Born in Brooklyn, New York City, I guess you could say that he was a graduate of the School of Hard Knocks. Maybe that's why he always seemed to work harder than everyone else around him. When it came time for him to get a show on TV, he wanted to own it. Unheard of in the days of early television, Gleason often penned deals that provided him with huge sums of money and allowed him to produce many of his own shows. Everything Gleason did, he did with great passion. Every script for the TV shows had to be just the way he envisioned it. No one was ever allowed to step out of character. Camera shots and angles were always set up the way he wanted them. His passion also extended into his personal life. Fascinated by flying saucers and the unexplained, he ultimately assembled one of the world's greatest parapsychological libraries. The bulk of it resides today at the University of Miami Library. In 1982, I was a guest on a talk show at a Miami radio station. The subject was UFOs and the paranormal. After the show, I was handed a note by the receptionist. This often happens when I do radio guest spots because some people prefer to share their own UFO or paranormal experiences with me off the air. While walking to my car, I took a quick look at the note. It said, "Please call Mr. Gleason at," and it gave a phone number. When I arrived back at my hotel room, I called the number, asked for Mr. Gleason, and gave my name. An assistant got on the phone and informed me that Jackie Gleason wanted to speak to me, if possible, the next day at a Fort Lauderdale location. Well, needless to say, I accepted the invitation. The meeting location was a bar at the Jolly Roger Hotel in Fort Lauderdale. Now, I don't know if Gleason owned the hotel, or merely had friends there, but after stopping by the front desk, I was escorted to a small bar that was closed to the public at that time of day. Gleason sat at a table like a king holding court, but looked older and weaker than I had imagined he would. I wondered why Gleason hadn't met me in one of his favorite Miami haunts, but it may be that he just wanted to keep a low profile. Either way, I knew that Gleason was a serious guy who hated small talk, and I wasn't about to ruffle his feathers. After a brief handshake, Gleason asked me a number of questions about my UFO and paranormal investigations. We talked for about an hour and a half. Actually, he asked questions and I answered them. He said to me, "You know, I get your newsletter," he said knowingly. "Good stuff." He was especially interested in articles that covered the topic of crashed UFOs. At that time, a lot of buzz had been created by former military officers who had begun to speak out about their involvement with the cover-up of UFO crashes. Out of the blue, Gleason told me how that Richard Nixon was a good friend of his. In fact, he had supported Nixon in every possible way during his successful bid for the presidency in 1968. In 1971, Gleason's efforts were rewarded when he attended a small White House dinner in Gleason's honor. After dinner, Gleason spoke privately with Richard Nixon. He asked the president if there was anything that Nixon could tell him about UFOs. Were they real? Were they alien spacecraft? Well, according to Gleason, Nixon told him, "Well, Jackie, if you can arrange to arrive at MacDill Air Force Base in Tampa sometime over the next few days, I'll arrange to have you shown some things that may help answer some of your questions." Gleason arrived in Tampa, Florida, a day and a half later. After calling a phone number provided to him by someone on Nixon's staff, he headed out to MacDill Air Force Base. After arriving on the base, he was taken to a dark-colored building that appeared to be some sort of a storage facility. Once inside, he had to pass through several levels of security. Finally, Gleason was escorted into a large room where some strange debris lay on the floor. An officer told him, "This material is from Roswell." No emotion, just a matter-of-fact statement. The officer handed Gleason a small piece which seemed almost weightless and very flexible. Just then, a light came on in the center part of the room. Gleason was astonished to see what looked like a large piece of a broken disc just floating a few feet above the floor. Warned not to approach it, Gleason still got an eyeful, but the surprises weren't over. After just a few minutes, Gleason was escorted to another room. 3 containers with glass plates for viewing greeted him. These were the occupants found near the object you just saw. Again, with little emotion, the officer gave Jackie a one-sentence description that spoke volumes. The beings were about 4 to 5 feet tall. 2 of the bodies were badly damaged, but one was in very good shape. As Gleason looked at it, the officer said, "This one died later." It had large oval eyes, grayish skin, and looked male. "Are they all males?" Gleason asked. "Your guess is as good as ours." He answered Jackie with a slight smile, but it was time to go. The experience of seeing the object and bodies affected Gleason more than he first realized. Although he had a hit variety show on CBS, Jackie Gleason walked away from everything for a few years to study more about UFOs and the paranormal. It wasn't until 1975 that he went back to work with the Smokey and the Bandit movies and some other projects. Despite all the denials and downplaying of UFO reports, some of the most compelling evidence that UFOs are here and hailed from somewhere else comes from encounters involving the military itself. One such encounter involves the USS FDR. Crewman Chester Brzezinski describes what happened. In the year 1958, we were on a shakedown cruise when there was a small light that was following our ship. Then the light came right up to us. It came in close enough to us so that you could see the shape of the object and also see that there were figures inside of it. The impression that I got was that those figures were not human beings. I was down below when I was told to go up topside to see something strange. So I went up and couldn't believe my eyes. I saw a bright white ball of light. It headed straight for us, and getting bigger and bigger. It was spherical, about 75 to 100 feet long. It turned red-orange, and I could feel the heat on my face. I could see silhouettes of figures looking at us. They had no features, and you could tell they weren't human. Then the bottom turned cherry red, and it vanished in a flash. Soon after the incident, crew members who talked about it were transferred. Then the CIA came on board to investigate a so-called gambling problem. It was a massive cover-up, notes Brzezinski. There was no gambling. CBS was making a special documentary about the UFO phenomenon in 1973. Veteran news anchor Walter Cronkite was approached with the idea. Though the program was to be hosted by several CBS News reporters, Cronkite would do the interviews. By 1973, I'd already been investigating UFOs for several years. As it happened, Walter Cronkite read a small piece that I wrote for a now-defunct UFO publication about the Air Force cover-up of UFO information. Cronkite was making a list of people he wanted to interview for the CBS special, and the article interested him. In September of 1973, I received a letter from CBS News indicating their interest in my work. After a few phone calls, I was actually able to meet and speak with the man himself. On a cool New York City day in late September, I sat down and had an informal lunch with Walter Cronkite. As we lunched, Cronkite told me about the TBS special and indicated that he might want to interview me. He wanted a younger person's perspective on the phenomenon. Most of the UFO researchers in those days were older and had taken up the topic as a retirement project. Cronkite was especially interested in some of the Air Force stories I'd collected about the cover-up. After about 30 minutes of back-and-forth conversation, Cronkite said to me, "Let me tell you my UFO story." For the next 5 minutes, I sat in stunned silence as he told me what had happened. In the 1950s, Cronkite was part of a pool of news reporters brought out to a small South Pacific island to watch the test of a new Air Force missile. The reporters had been warned that photography and audio recordings were forbidden. They would have to give a written account of the event. As Air Force security personnel walked around the perimeter of the test area with guard dogs and the news reporters watched, the missile fired up and was about to be released. Just then, a large disc-type UFO appeared on the scene. Cronkite guessed that the object was about 50 to 60 feet in diameter, a dull gray color, and had no visible means of propulsion. Because the noise of activity around him and the missile engine was so loud, he couldn't tell whether the disk made any noise. He didn't notice any coming directly from the object. As Air Force guards ran toward the UFO with their dogs, the disk hovered about 30 feet off of the ground. It suddenly sent out a blue beam of light which struck the missile. It also struck a guard and a dog at the same time. The missile was frozen in midair about 70 feet from the launcher as it had taken off, and the guard was frozen in mid-step and a dog frozen in midair as he jumped at the disk. Cronkite reminded me that all this happened within a very short space of time, probably about 5 minutes or less. Suddenly, the missile exploded. After that, the disk vanished. The guard and dog looked all right, but were quickly taken away by medical personnel. At the same time, guards rapidly ushered the reporters into a concrete observation bunker. After about 30 minutes of sitting in that hot box, they were brought out into the air again and addressed by an Air Force colonel. The officer told them it was all part of the test. Obviously making it up as he went along, the colonel said the event was staged to test media reaction to UFOs. He reinforced the usual line to the reporters that flying saucers were probably not extraterrestrial, but what people were actually seeing was secret planes being tested by the Air Force. This test was designed to show the media how shocking it could be to suddenly view a new technology. Well, Cronkite was certain that what he viewed was indeed a new technology, but he was also sure it was not an earthly one. He didn't believe the Air Force explanation then, and he didn't believe it at the time that he told me the story. During the 1960s, a UFO supposedly crashed along the U.S.-Mexican border. It may have been one of several crashes in that region. USA forces were said to have crossed the border to retrieve any intact parts of the UFO or occupants that had survived the crash. This photograph is said to be proof that one did. The photo was sent to Project Blue Book for comment. After a brief period of study, the Air Force said it was a real photo, but that the creature in it was an ape used in rocketry research. It's interesting to note that the Air Force explanation coincided with a popular movie at that time called The Planet of the Apes. Perhaps they took a cue from Hollywood. Whether you believe the ape explanation or not, stories of UFO crash retrievals by the U.S. government go back as far as modern sightings themselves. During World War II, it's thought that a UFO crashed into a frozen lake on the small Arctic island of Spitsbergen. This may have happened once or even twice before. Because Spitsbergen was under Swedish control and Sweden was a neutral country during the war, the incident wasn't acted on by any of the world's major powers at that time. But in 1946, the U.S. government made arrangements to investigate and, if necessary, obtain the object. Already on a goodwill tour sponsored by the Shell Oil Company to help promote the rebuilding of Europe, General James Doolittle was said to have been asked by U.S. authorities to investigate the matter. Doolittle was famous for leading the daring bomber raid on Tokyo at the very start of World War II. After spending what seemed like an unusual amount of time on Spitsbergen, Doolittle is said to have arranged for the crashed object and possibly its deceased occupants to be brought back to America on the USS Alabama. A few sailors who recall the Alabama's trip to Spitsbergen have said that the object was loaded onto the ship in a large crate. The crate was secured on deck and covered with canvas. The ship then immediately returned to the United States with its strange cargo. During the voyage, no one but an elite guard unit was allowed near the crate. Harrier jets have become an important part of the United States military. Originally developed over 40 years ago, beginning with the Hawker series of aircraft, which incorporated a French engine design into a British plane, today's Harrier is the result of international cooperation and is one of the Western world's most lethal weapons. With a track record of reliability, this workhorse aircraft rarely gets into trouble. But like all aircraft, they can be vulnerable to the whims of unknown intelligences piloting vehicles far more advanced. On October 22, 1989, experienced British aerospace pilot Taylor Scott took off from Dunsville, England. 7 minutes into the flight, he told air traffic controllers that he was approaching his 30,000-foot ceiling. After that, silence. Concerned that something had happened, British authorities asked a nearby U.S. Air Force Galaxy transport aircraft to go over and take a look. What they saw, none of them will ever forget. Crew members aboard the Galaxy transport saw the Harrier flying by itself without a pilot on board. This is a still from a video taken by one of the Galaxy crew members using his own personal video camera. They reported that the canopy and ejection seat were gone from the aircraft and that it was flying on automatic settings. The Galaxy stayed with the jet until it stalled and crashed into the sea. But a British investigation revealed conflicting details. While they originally believed that an ejection seat rocket had misfired and flung the pilot helplessly from his aircraft, a later examination of the wreck showed that probably wasn't the case. One investigator said it was as though the pilot had simply been snatched from his plane. The final report of the investigation was never made available to the public. On April 18, 1996, Governor Miller of Nevada officially dedicated State Route 375 as the Extraterrestrial Highway. The ceremony was held in Rachel, Nevada. The highway stretches approximately 100 miles through Lincoln and Nye counties, 140 miles north of Las Vegas, and connects highways 93 and 6. It's some distance from, but has become synonymous with, the U.S. government reservation known as Area 51. What we call Area 51 is actually a huge block of land owned and used by the U.S. government. Every branch of the military is represented there, and the property serves a variety of functions. While the government now admits that the place exists, they have no comments regarding its use. The area most associated with the UFO phenomenon is the Nellis Air Force Range, where secret planes have been tested for years. But in the early 1990s, a whistleblower told the world that something else was being tested there too. Robert Lazar is a physicist. He's claimed to have worked for the Department of Naval Intelligence at a facility within Area 51 known as S4. In an effort to prove his story to the world, Lazar has produced an ID and W-2 which show he worked for the Navy. The MAJ designation on his badge is said to go along with the idea that a group called MJ, or Majestic 12, always headed by a naval officer, dictates policy and controls information related to UFOs and extraterrestrials for the U.S. government. The purpose of the S4 facility was said to reverse engineer captured alien hardware, but test flights of still very flight-worthy discs were also said to have taken place there. The crafts operated using a gravity drive and were capable of amazing maneuvers without causing harm to the pilots inside. As part of the briefing for his employment at S4, Lazar was shown what he described as a short history of what the government has been able to learn about the creatures that build and fly these discs. Everything from samples of their writings to a physical description and photos of the creatures themselves were included. It's said that recordings have been found that show scenes from our early history, leaving the impression that these beings have been visiting Earth for thousands of years. More on Robert Lazar and S4 is available on my video, Secrets of Area 51 and Roswell. Astronomers peering through their telescopes often saw strange objects coming and going from the moon, as this 1880s photograph illustrates. Astronaut John Glenn saw and photographed strange objects in space during his historic 1962 Mercury spaceflight. As soon as humans arrived in space, they found that they were not alone. During the moon flights, astronauts found it hard to mask descriptions of what they saw when it came to UFOs. Some made statements using old pilot slang for UFOs, referring to them as things like Santa Claus. Wally Schirra was the first to use the Santa term to describe a UFO during a Mercury 8 flight. Astronauts often reported seeing strange lights on the dark side of the moon. During a 1968 moon mission, astronaut James Lovell said, "Please be informed that there is a Santa Claus," after seeing something odd on the dark side. Neil Armstrong, the first man to set foot on the moon, was photographed with a large bright object hovering over his head. In 1992, a French astronomer saw and photographed odd lights inside the huge moon crater Langrenus. Such lights have been seen by astronomers for over 100 years and remain unexplained. Scientists refer to them as transient lunar phenomena. Is this strange object filmed from an Apollo spacecraft near the moon a possible source for the odd lights? More than a few moonwalkers reported a feeling that they were always being watched. The truth may be out there, but if it's on the moon, NASA probably airbrushed it out. The upside of modern technology is the ability for us to go back and look at what amounts to some creative artwork on moon photos that have been touched up by NASA. Here we see an Apollo astronaut standing in front of a totally black background. Where are the stars? When a computer reads through the changes made to the photo, we see what appears to be the ruins of a dome.